So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Words and welcome to our guest.
Can everyone hear us okay? Hear me okay? I guess Mike can ask for himself. Congratulations on the book, and thank you for writing it. You justified my early 90s existence. It's worthy of a book. I must not have been wasting my time.
You haven't been wasting any time at all.
I moved to New York and started working at Guitar World at the very beginning in 1991 with an interest in this type of music, and these bands were starting to pop a lot at Wetlands and Nightingales. And, there's the first 50 pages of the book where I was reliving a lot of things. So, but you started the book in Princeton. In fact, the very first sentence made me laugh. I don't want to misquote it. It's Princeton is the forgotten center of rock and roll.
It's hilarious.
So why did you start in Princeton and with that quote?
A bunch of bands have lineage there. All the Blues Traveler guys were there. All the Gosh Sweet Wine guys were there. Trey from Fish was there, and his writing partner Tom was there. And they all kind of ran around in the same circles at times, and other times not. They played in bands together, and just kind of did the high school thing together. And I just thought that was a weird little ground zero for what became some pretty big acts within, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. Fish was selling out places in Burlington 6 years later. Blues Travelers playing every single night in New York. Gosh Sweet Wine was getting things going. Spin Doctors were getting things going. Chris from Spin Doctors was also in Princeton. So they're all, it was just like a place where things seemed to be happening. I don't know, Princeton. You've been there, right?
Not that much.
It's like
yeah,
super happening.
of course, yeah.
Right?
But you never exactly say it, I don't think. But it's sort of like an unspoken thing, especially in that section, that this is kind of an upper middle class white thing, right? Because a lot of these guys met at prep school.
Sure.
I mean, is there anything where they were all sort of like cast-offs in their elite environment?
Yeah. It really gets into pretty quickly how. No, you're right. It was Princeton is very white. Princeton University is Ivy League, and a lot of the kids that were in these bands were kind of like the outsiders, right? They listen to classic rock. They smoked pot all the time. They, did the '80s high school thing that we probably remember, but they had money for sure. They came from money.
It's interesting to me now to look back on it and think that in that era, which I was just taking for granted at the time, but Grateful Dead was still very much active. The Allman Brothers were very much active, just reforming, who were sort of the alpha and omega of this whole world, and everybody sort of offshoots from them to some extent or another. Do you think the fact that they were active, I don't know, what do you think the relationship was to the music? Because in my mind, these bands sort of started to fill a void after Jerry died, Grateful Dead ceased to exist. But that was sort of what I was thinking before I read this, and that brought me back to like real time and realizing that's really not quite accurate. They were popping before that.
It proved you wrong.
Proved me wrong. Proved my assumptions wrong. But it made me think about it. Like, do you think it was just this? It was exciting because you could go to such a small club and see bands taking a similar approach, but it had a little bit more of a punk vibe. And obviously, the music's not punk, but I mean, it's just a DIY.
The whole scene was very DIY. It was people that wanted to make music. They wanted to start bands. They had no real music industry connections. They just had an incredibly strong work ethic where they would practice all day and play all night they would play till 3, 4 in the morning in New York and rinse and repeat every single day. The guy, I talked to a club owner at this club called the Front in Burlington that doesn't exist anymore. And that was a place where fish graduated from this small bar, Nectar's, up to the Front, and it held like a couple hundred people. And he said that they would come in when they didn't have gigs at like noon or like 1 o'clock,
Yeah, that resonated with me.
and just play and just practice. And they weren't practicing in a studio, they weren't practicing in a garage, they were practicing, on stage, as if people were there. And then they would do that for 6, 7 hours. These are like, 20-year-old kids. And so that was just indicative to that. They all had this really intense work ethic. Blues Traveler, they were playing 6, 7 nights a week at any place that would take them. And so, you're doing that all day. They did tell me, God forbid we have a day job, because that would have made us suck, because they would have to work, right? So all I did was,
That's what girlfriends are for.
that's all they played. So they played, and then they went to play a show, and then just kept doing that. If you do that a couple hundred times a year, you're getting pretty good. You're going to learn about each other and learn how to play.
I didn't mean to exaggerate. But this is a reality. I was hanging out with a lot of musicians in the early 90s in New York, and every single one of them, and these guys, but also like a whole Lower East Side sort of proto-punk scene, some guys I was friends with, every single one of them either was a trust fund kid or had a girlfriend who went and worked their asses off while they slept until 1 o'clock. And I used to feel kind of like lame because I would cut out at like 2 in the morning. And then at some point I realized I'm the only one who actually gets up and goes to a job in the morning, literally, in this whole crew. So I no longer felt lame.
But one of the interesting things that I did discover in the early days is they figured out, all of the acts figured out really quickly that bars were cool, and but you didn't get a lot of money. You got like maybe, if you were lucky, a couple $100 a night, or a percentage of the bar tab. So if you brought in a lot of people, then you would get like 20% of the bar sales. But if you didn't, 20% of $50 is not that great. But they, what did they do? So they just like worked and had a lot of.
Well, some of them, there was, at least like with Widespread Panic down in they were from Athens. They played, I think, a fair amount of fraternity parties. And
Yeah. I mean, the frats, that's what I was getting at. And they found out that frats would pay them $5,000 to $10,000 for a gig. Like, they had money. And all the acts then would tap into that. So they would go play a frat gig, get a really big paycheck, and then work the bar scene, club scene at the same time. But that helped float them for sure.
And I see the guy here in a Mo shirt. I wouldn't say anyone who wears a Mo shirt should get a free copy of this book, but then you sell my book, because that's your audience. But I went down to the first Monterey for Guitar World, and I did a roundtable interview thing with the guys from Mo, I think String Cheese Incident, and Barber from Disco Biscuits. And John Gutwell, said something in that interview that has resonated with me, and the fraternity thing reminded me, which was this whole scene only exists because everybody wants to pretend they're back in college. And I think there's something to that. I mean, people wanted to relive their youth, and it wasn't that far removed for most people in the early days, and so it gave you a chance to.
Yeah, I mean, all of these places had, like, they were vibrant college scenes. And they were connecting with people that were on the internet at a very early day. You paid tuition in the early 90s to your university. You got a free internet account, right? So you could talk to people about these bands that you love. You could send them tapes. You could, do the things not in your little confined community that would help spread the word. A lot of these acts realized this pretty quickly and were of course they were into it, but they fostered it. You know, Panic told me that, you know, in the early days they would take their shows and just they would seed them. They would send them out to fans. They knew that this word of mouth marketing was something that, you know, it's very organic, and labels, you know, a label couldn't do that, right? And a record label can't tell you, I mean, a record label can deliver you something, but your friend telling you, you need to hear this thing, at that time, it was huge. It was huge.
The record label thing is interesting. So the quote, I have a blurb, a quote on the back of the book, and what I said, I want to read it because I actually believe it, and then discuss it a little bit. So, in the early 90s, as the New York music industry desperately scoured the nation for the next big thing, an organic music scene was taking shape right under its nose. This book captures that exciting, fluid time with the deep dive into the bands that blew up out of that scene and the ones that could have been contenders. And my perspective on that was really shaped because I was the managing editor of Guitar World during that time, and we were kind of the biggest musicians. I mean, we were just getting pummeled by record companies, and so much of the music industry was really driven by the labels at that time in a way that it no longer is. And this scene was happening completely sort of independently from my perspective, and thriving live, especially at Wetlands and other places. And the bands that did get signed by labels and then have hits early, Blues Travelers and Spin Doctors especially, and then Dave Matthews had that, became like a MTV VH1 hit. And Matthews is the exception to this, what I'm about to say, but like the other bands that have had the longest careers and probably sold the most tickets, stuff like Fish and Widespread Panic, never did. They always stayed outside of that, right?
Oh yeah, they
So
completely stayed out of it. I mean, you know, for this, Trey told me that the Elektra Records would, you know, come. We have to do this. You have to do this. You have to do this. And you know, they would do it because they liked the people. They liked the people there and wanted to help them. But you know, they knew that it wasn't going to get more people to come. Whatever they were already doing was fine. And if the record label woke up the next day and said, "We don't want you anymore. We don't like you anymore," they would say, "Great," and it wouldn't matter.
right.
They knew that. I mean, they literally could see like the ticket sales, the venue sizes jump from, you know, in '92 they're playing small theaters, in '94 they're playing Madison Square Garden. You know, Jerry hasn't died at that point.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, I think the first time that they announced, was it '94 when they did their first show at Madison Square Garden?
Yeah.
So when that was announced, it was like, it sent like a shockwave through the music industry, because nobody who wasn't like really tuned in and part of it had any idea that this band had grown so much, except obsessive Pulsar readers, you know.
Yeah, there's an amazing quote from a guy that worked in marketing at Elektra in there, and he's talking about how his boss was like, you know, yelling explicitives at him about this band that keeps selling out Madison Square Garden, and you can't sell CDs for this band. What is your problem? And he said that he was basically like, there was a tsunami coming, and we didn't understand it. And I think he was talking about the internet, you know, and how Napster really changed things. But they were very aware that a band like Fish, you know, a band like Mo, a band like Panic, they were very attuned to the internet and fan groups, and did everything they could to not shut any of that down. And you know, I remember that Mo's manager at that time, he told me that they would talk to the Fish guys about how to navigate things with Sony, and the fish guys were like, the fish management was like, you know, do not give up taping. Do not give up this. You know, like giving them the things that you do not want to give away, that ultimately their fans built up with them.
Right, and these bands all grew, of the bands we're talking about right now, by sort of forming an alliance together. So, you know, Fish was really popular in the Northeast, and so Widespread Panic would come up and open shows for them, and then, you know, Widespread Panic was big in the Southeast, they would go down there, and all these bands had these sort of alliances. In doing your interviews and research, was there one person who thought of that, or did it just happen organically?
I think it was a conversation between the early Fish management and the early Panic management. You know, they both could see like what was happening in these markets that they wanted to break into, but they, you know, a lot of these people, it was cold calling. You know, clubs and promoters and being like, let us play. Do you have a tape? Well, we have a live tape. We don't want that. Do you have a CD? Are you on a record label? No. Okay, no, we don't want to do that. You know, so, but if you're like, oh, well, we're Widespread Panic, we're selling tickets here in South Carolina. We have this band from Vermont going to open. You know, they'll be fine with that. But it would foster relationships and get people out of their territories when, you know, they didn't have any other ways to necessarily do it. You know, Medicine Martin Wood, one of my favorites, like they were cold calling all the time to get out of New York, and they would go down south all the time. It was a weird jazz band going down south. You know, it is kind of a stretch, but you know, they would find rock clubs that would be interested in little hotbeds like Knoxville and Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Atlanta, that would be hip to their sound. But yeah, they had to call nonstop.
And then these bands kind of formalized it with the Horde Tour, which I think was at 93?
It was 92, was the first one.
Does anyone here go to any of the Horde Tour shows? They were fun, right? And I think Fish pulled out of that after just 1 year because they were already getting big enough, right?
Fish played 4 shows,
okay.
And then they played maybe one this summer after. But there is a good story in there about them being backstage at Jones Beach after I think their last Horde Tour, which was the 4th, you know. And the manager from Blues Traveler, who concocted Horde with Popper and Bill Graham, he was like, so this is great, we're going to do this next summer, and then we're going to do this the next summer. And Fish's manager's like, we're never doing this again. And he was like, why? It's like, well, we're not an appetizer band. Like it's all Fish from now on.
Right.
Like that's it, and it was.
Yeah.
Like they rarely had opening acts from that point on, and rarely served as opening acts.
The book, for those of you who haven't seen it yet, is in an oral history format, which for those of you who don't know what that means, it's a collection of quotes. I think like 95% from your own interviews, if I gather. Did you plan on being an oral history all along, or did you start writing the book and then decide that was the best one?
No, oral history from the get-go. I like that format. People like that format. Have you read Daisy Jones and the Six?
Yes.
I mean, I read an interview after I read that, and she was like, oh, yeah, I got this idea because I saw my husband reading a bunch of music oral history, so I'll just do that in fiction.
Yeah.
And I like Fleetwood Mac. I just made that part up, but that's basically what it is. And so, look, people like them. It's a fun way to tell a narrative. I like them. You know, there's a few that were iconic to me, like Please Kill Me and Meet Me in the Bathroom. Like, those are just really good stories about a scene and puts you there. And also, like, I mean, this culture wants to hear from the people that did it, they don't want to hear from
You.
me.
Yeah. No, I understand.
So let's be real.
I've written 2 oral histories, and it's the response to it is so interesting. I think most people like it, you know, if when they're interested in the topic, obviously. There are some people who don't, you know, and they you know, you'll occasionally see reviews of, you know, they're like, this is not a book, it's just a bunch of quotes. The writer's really lazy, and which is, I mean, whatever, people like something or they don't like it, but the thinking it's lazy thing is really irritating, because it's actually really, really hard. I mean, did you transcribe all those interviews yourself?
Define transcribe. Upload to Otter?
Yeah.
Yes, I uploaded them to
Yeah,
Otter.
it's yeah, because it's like putting a big giant jigsaw puzzle together.
That it is, yeah. I mean, you have to construct a narrative for each chapter, and then you have to hope that each chapter, and there's 69 or 70 chapters in here, tells an overall narrative of what happened over, for this, it's over 15 years.
Right. Yeah, that I think the way you just described it is perfect. That's what people don't quite understand who think it's lazy, is you're basically constructing a narrative the same way you would if you were writing in prose.
Sure.
But then, you know, in some ways it can be even harder because you have to make it all make sense.
But it's fun. I think it's a fun format. It's fun to put together. The people I interviewed, a lot of them are music industry veterans who were, you know, at the ground floor at these record labels in the late 80s and 90s, and they just have amazing stories. And you know, it's been 35 years, and they love this time. They love this moment in their career and in the musicians that are in the book. It's cool.
So like I mentioned on there, it includes the bands that really made it, and then that could have been a contender of bands. Who do you think is the biggest coulda, shoulda, would have made it band that never quite got out of their little scene?
Yeah, there's a few bands that kind of fall into that. There's a band called Strange Folk. There's a band called Gosh Rewind. Mo is a little bit of that.
Most still going.
Most still going. I mean, they all had major record label deals, and the issue is a lot of the labels would go to clubs to scout out the next band. They would see the clubs packed to the gills. These bands, for like Gosh Rewind, didn't have a label, and that the bands were super passionate. So they say, oh, we got to sign them. They already have a fan base, and we can just blow them up. But at the time, there was grunge happening, there was rap happening, like a lot of things were happening. And so a lot of acts were being signed. And they, you know, sometimes the labels wouldn't put the amount of budget that they needed to quote unquote break a band. And with Gosh Rewind, like they'll, you know, there's a funny story where the drummer is talking about driving down 7th Avenue and they're passing Madison Square Garden, and their manager is like, see that? You're gonna play there one day. And the drummer is like, I don't care about playing there one day. I want to drive by there and hear me on the radio. Okay? So, you know, they had people within the bands also had different kind of visions and aspirations, and you know, but back then, like being on the radio was, you know, it was a big ticket. You know, Blues Traveler had 3 records before Ford came out, before they were a quote unquote 2-hit wonder of 94 and 95. You know, Spin Doctors, who don't get thought of in the scene, but were completely in the scene. You know, their record was out for 9 months, 10 months, and completely buried. And then the record label got this like really funny / scathing letter from a DJ in Vermont who was like, what are you doing? Like, you are sleeping on this. Like, we are using their music as bumper music and ads. And people are calling up and requesting the music in an ad. Like, you have to understand that that never happens. And, yeah, I didn't see a letter. It was just like, you're an idiot. You guys are idiots. And so it kind of woke them up. And, you know, so that record was out 9 months before they put some muscle behind it. And then, you know, MTV got behind it, and then it completely changed the trajectory of that band.
Right, but it's amazing that anyone at the label, which I think it was Epic, right? Listened to a random DJ, read it and listened to him, and that they hadn't given up after 9 months, because that was pretty unusual.
Well, DJs were pretty powerful back then. I think he had like a name behind it, so it's like, if this dude was like saying, you suck, like, people were it would be like, oh, like people were noticing.
As you wrote the book, as you did the interviews and started to write the book, were there a lot of surprises to you? Did anyone emerge as more of a character, person or band than you imagined, or?
No, I kind of grew weirdly attached to all of them. They all have different ways of speaking, and a lot of them are like like, I don't want to say removed, but like this was just a very specific time in their careers where they were like in their mid 40s or early 50s, and now they're like in their mid to late 70s, and they love to talk about.
You're talking about the label people, not the bands.
Yeah, but they had no filters, which is great. Someone, you know, looking for people that have no filters. But you know, the guys with Mo, they were signed to Sony. They told me they had like an $800,000 signing advance for 2 records, which seems like a lot. It is a lot. I think it's a lot of money for those guys. And there's a story in there from the guitarist Al, who was saying how, you know, when they first got signed, he met the president of the label, and she said to him, like, yeah, I don't really get your band, you know, I don't really understand it, but Michael likes it, so whatever, I trust him. And he was like, and I walked out of there on cloud 9. I thought this was the greatest thing. Like, we're gonna be able to do whatever we want in the studio, and the president is gonna be okay with that, and that's cool. And then he was like, and I was telling that story 3 months later, and someone said to me, like, you didn't think it was a big, massive problem that the president of the label hated your band? Like, you didn't think that was an issue? And he was like, yeah, I didn't really think about it. When you put it that way, that sounds terrible. And, you know, they got dropped. Like, you know, their first record didn't do anything, you know, by those days standards. Their second record, they just wanted them to record it and issue it out, and then they got dropped. And they were really bummed about that. Like, they, you know, so like stories like that, of like these moments of like wide-eyed like optimism about what you can be and what is in front of you, and then the people that can make that happen decide they don't want to, right? There's a lot of those stories in there, and I just think it's fascinating. And as a postscript that isn't in the book, but Al was like, yeah, I just didn't really understand it. I just, you know, and so we just started releasing things on our own label. And 6 years later, we were selling out 2 nights at Radio City Music Hall. And I was very proud of that. And I didn't understand why they didn't want us. So there's like there's these little moments in there that are really just indicative of people like putting their heart and soul into something, and just sometimes not making it.
Yeah. Well, the music industry at that point in the '90s could, hits really sold a lot of record CDs,
Yeah.
and so the labels were kind of just throwing stuff out, hoping something hit, and nobody expected, Pearl Jam and Nirvana to become what they were. I mean, that had been an organic thing in Seattle that obviously then just completely captured the imagination. And so I think this thing was happening, and they're like, maybe that'll be next, and then throw it out there, and then Spin Doctors and Blues Travelers had these hits, and so it's like, hey, this is gonna work, and so they start signing these bands. But most of the music wasn't really generated towards that. It was this grassroots thing.
Yeah, and that's the difference, and that's what I think is cool about the artists in here is that, they did have this grassroots mentality that they still stuck to. No matter what, labels or MTV threw at them. I mean, the Spin Doctors certainly fizzled. Blues Traveler had problems at the end of the decade. That they had those two massive hits, Run Around and Hook, and then the dude that worked at the label told me, yeah, I pushed their record in '98, and no DJ wanted to touch it.
I was struck pretty early in here when you were writing about the Spin Doctors. There's a quote from Eric Shankman, the guitarist, that, to paraphrase, was sort of like, well, when it hit, things got kind of wild, like life was out of control. And it kind of just brought me back because I had written about them when the record came out, and then when they started to have the hit, I was bugging Guitar World to let me do a big thing, and we did. And then he just kept blowing me off, and it was it was pre-cell phone, so he was calling my apartment, and I fell asleep on the couch with the phone in my hand because he never called, and then he called me at 3 or 4 in the morning. And I was like, what? Who? What is going on? And so I just thought it was interesting. It's like I caught the tiniest glimpse of that because it in a way those guys who had the success had to struggle with that more than the guys who were grinding it out.
Oh yeah. I mean, it completely changed things. The Spin Doctors were on that first world tour that you were just talking about in '92. In 1993, they were on something called the MTV Alternative Nation Tour, where they were headlining, and Screaming Trees and Soul Asylum was opening for them. And so that was, they were being positioned away from their core audience and being asked to grow in that manner. And Baron told me, he was like, yeah, we had people at our shows, there was 20-year-old kids in tie-dyes, most likely on something, standing next to a mom with their 10-year-olds who just wanted to bring their kids to a concert because they liked the songs that they heard on the radio.
Right.
And their core audience got really bummed out about that. They don't want to be partying and hanging out with
the 10-year-old
random moms and 10-year-olds.
Yeah.
That's what they had to face.
Right, and that was what you did at that time, but it's definitely not a way to build a sustainable career.
Yeah. They're quite fun.
Yeah. I wonder if anyone who was on that tour, because you could say the same thing Screaming Trees fans, who were a pretty cool band, didn't want to hear the Spin Doctors either. So I wonder if anyone on those package stores ended up surviving.
Yeah, I don't know. I would imagine that. Even 2 weeks ago, I went to Prospect Park to see Snail Mail and Dinosaur Jr. And there was a lot of people there that were just there for Snail Mail. Never heard Dinosaur Jr. at all. That's cool. But I imagine it's still, it certainly was the case back then as well. But all of those bands that I just cited, they all had, pretty big radio hits that was on alternative radio nonstop.
Well, and both of us in the last 2 nights went and saw Fish out in Forest Hills, and it is I've never, I've been seeing Fish since probably 1992 or 93. Not that many times compared to a real fish head, but it is sort of grounding for me, you know, to go and see these guys. It's been that's 30 years, and it's the same four guys, and I don't know. There's with so much change, and how many things are different than they were, mostly for the worse from 1993. It sort of, for me, is grounding, and I think that is a big part of the appeal of these bands. It's not. I mean, I guess that's sort of, I'm describing nostalgia, but I don't view it as nostalgia. It's something a little different. Does that make?
It doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make sense.
No.
What do you think? Does that make sense?
But no, look, like Dave Matthews' voice, it sounds the same as it did 30 years ago. Trey's guitar tones, Fish, sounds largely the same. Widespread Panic, like they all have this sound that is certainly rooted in that era, and that's when a lot of people were coming of age, you know, and you get super hooked in these in this really tight moment of when you're like 18 to 25 with the music that you connect to, and a lot of times it doesn't leave you. I mean, you evolve, you move on in some aspects of your life, but you know, the song will go with you and the band will go with you, and I think people like watching those bands evolve with them. That's cool. They feel like a connection to it, and it's not just, you know, it's a lot of genres. So yeah, no, maybe it is a little bit nostalgic, but you know, everybody has nostalgia. It like hit them every day when you're driving around, or you have a certain smell, like even if it's just for a moment. Or last night when they played for 3 hours, like it's people that, you know, you're with a bunch of people that have this common bond, that experienced this portion of life with you. You don't know them, that's fine, but you've kind of come together because you think what you're about to see is phenomenal.
Right, you're in a friendly cone.
Yeah.
Should we open up to questions?
Yeah.
About that time? Anyone? Questions?
I have a question, kind of what you were just talking about. As someone in college right now, I kind of feel like in the music industry, there isn't really like a lot of bands anymore. And I guess I'm curious as journalists, like, why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. You mean there's not a lot of live music, or there's not a lot of?
Well, there's live music, like, especially earlier you were talking about, like, the college scene and how a lot of these bands started that way. Like, where I go to school, there is a lot of music, but I feel like in terms of talking about, like, big record labels, they're all signing on solo artists. And I feel like it's a lot of, like, a solo movement at this point in the music industry, and I feel like there isn't that community that you guys had.
I think you're right, but I'm not exactly sure why. But it's Mike's event.
Because you were talking about the internet being kind of like something that came in at the same time. That was, we're talking about like the 90s. So like maybe that has something to do with it, or like the whole physical media, like vinyl thing, if that also played a role.
I don't think it did in terms of that aspect of it, like bands versus solo artists. I don't know. What do you think that?
I think it's attention span. No.
No, but
No one has an attention span.
I don't think so. I mean, I do think attention span is an issue.
4 hours.
Although these fucking podcasts, like people listen to 3 hours of Joe Rogan and these like morons just talking about things they don't know anything about for 3 hours if they're so long.
And there's
So-
solo shows.
So that's contrary to the attention span thing, and I don't know how to square that circle, because clearly, even like in the times I've been doing books for St. Martin's, but my first one was in 2014 with them. Like every book, every few years, the promo videos they make have gone from like 45 seconds to 35 seconds to 20 seconds, and they literally have discussed that with them, and they tell me literally that's why. But I don't know. What do you think about the band versus solo artist thing? It's a very legit question. I'm not blowing it off, but I don't really have a satisfactory answer.
So here's my theory. I think bands and artists, whether they're solo or not, they have to be able to play live. And if you cannot put on a great live show, either at St. James Gate or Madison Square Garden, like people are not going to. It's not going to resonate. And the ones that are doing that these days put on a fantastic live show. So if you talk about bands, I just don't think the avenues for how they used to get popular, it's not as, algorithms and Spotify and all that stuff, like, it's fine, you can listen to whatever band you want on there, but the methods of discovery, it's just shifted. It's very solo, right? The radio was one person playing to a bunch of people, and a bunch of people could hear that at once. That's the only way they could hear it, right? But now it's it's like this Netflixian model of just consumption.
I think they're also, I'm just thinking about this, I think that part of it has to be that you can really, and a couple guys in here make this point, or in the book about their early career, you couldn't so easily record things at home. Like when what?
You have to have like a cassette.
Yeah, like so
record
you had
when
like
it came on the radio.
I mean like record your own music
Sorry.
on home. But you had like a Tascam, like when they came out with a home 4-track cassette thing, was a huge deal. And so like mostly when people wanted to make music, they kind of had to get together with other people. And it's pretty easy now for everyone. I mean, you don't have to have any real musical skill or ability. If you can sing or you can start writing songs, you can. So maybe it's easier to do it by yourself. And there's not quite the infrastructure for live music, which Mike was just saying, like, a couple guys in this book say, and Trey out of South Stacy made this point last time I interviewed him, that one of the reasons that they thought they took off in Burlington, that they could play so many gigs early, is that the drinking age was 18. So that's not in terms of like people being smashed, but in terms of like there's this huge population of college students who could go. I went to University of Michigan. I worked at a bar called Rick's American Cafe, which had awesome live music. And on weekends it was mostly national or big regional acts. But I think most weeks, Sunday and Monday, we didn't have music. But like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday would be local bands. And in Ann Arbor, in Michigan, it was 21 to drink. But Ann Arbor had a thing that you could get into the bar at 18. And then you got a wristband, but nobody paid attention. Like liquor laws were a little more lax, and so there was just more of an audience. And I don't know, it's a pain in the ass for venues to have live bands. I mean, having been on every which side of that, and so like so many of them just don't do it anymore, other than really dedicated music venues. But I mean, like the little club, like that's like this big and has a stage in the corner, doesn't seem to exist that much.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I mean, a band that I've loved the last several years, Big Thief. They put out great studio records, but they play a killer live show. Like watching her sing is just transformative. It's amazing, and that I think people connect to that. Like people are, when they do go see something and they can connect to it, like they want that feeling, especially when there's a lot of domination with that people don't have control over, with like algorithms and feeds and all that stuff. Like that's just like force-fed stuff to you, and this is like, oh, this is a thing that I can go and watch and connect to with other people.
And when you see a band, like you're seeing people collaborating and working together. And when you're in a band, you're collaborating and working together, which is like better than what most people do these days. Like it's forced interaction. And I do think that even if people don't understand that, they can sense that when they see a band, that like, the drummer might have as much control over the song as the singer, which is not the case when it's a solo artist in a backing band where the drummer is supposed to play what the singer wants him or her to play.
Yeah, I think, thank you guys. I think it's hard to have these conversations and not think of people's own individual histories and their own journey. But I was thinking what you were saying with why, I'm 42, but I was going for wetlands when I was 15 and 16, right? So I also think, like, I wonder how much the post 9/11 digital smartphone world, which sort of came at the same time, and even places like the wetlands existed today, like people who were underage were not getting in. They're not getting in now the way that I got in then, and things were. That's different. So I just wonder what you think about that type of club scene and if that can exist in today's world. Could another wetlands exist? Could people who are 15 and 16 hang out to 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and get exposed to live music in 2025? No?
They probably can in certain places. Yeah, but what you're saying, it's a lot harder, for sure.
Now your parents are like tracking you.
Yeah, why the hell are you doing it? Why are you on Crosby Street?
That's exactly right.
Get your ass home.
Just
Yeah.
didn't know what you were doing, and it was easier.
There's a good story from the guy that founded Sound Tribe Sector 9. Now he was, at like that age, was really obsessed with Modesto Martin Wood and would go all around the South to try to see them. And there were definitely clubs that would not let him in. And so he would have to stand in the parking lot and listen through like the back doors to hear this band that he drove 300-400 miles to see, which is dedication. It's cool, but it's it probably varies by region, I would guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I grew up in Pittsburgh, and I was friends with the kid whose father owned the Decade, which is like the biggest rock club in town. So we just walked in the back door. It was just lucky. I don't really know what. I'm not sure like other people, but yeah, I don't know. It's a different. It definitely. It's just another one of those different eras.
Yeah, exactly.
But you shouldn't have been out till 2 a.m. when you were 15.
That's great, thanks you guys. I'm wondering well, you guys are talking like this TED is a specific finite set of time, 15 years. But I believe in bands, I believe in music, I believe in the continuance of those bands. I believe there's many more bands out there, whether it's this era or something else. Who's taking the mantle? Who's next? In this related world.
Well, there's a bunch of bands, really. I mean, in New Jersey, there's this band Dogs in a Pile. I mean, they're down in, I think they're based
So
in
it's alive and
Asbury.
well, Mike.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's alive. I don't know if it's totally well. It is alive and well, but it definitely Daniel Donato. I mean, there's all kinds of people, but it's just, I don't know, maybe because it's harder, only better quality will keep going. I don't know. I'm just thinking, I'm making this up off the top of my head.
I mean, there's going to be people that will want to make music.
Yeah, but I don't think it's a finite period. I think this book covers a finite period because it's the birth of this whole thing, right?
It's like, yeah,
it's
like
not like it
second
ends
wave.
when the book ends. But
Yeah, I just wanted to end on New Year's Eve, 1999. You know, the turn of the century, millennium. Y2K nonsense was crazy. You know, we all probably remember Y2K nonsense as being crazy, and you know, it was just like this dawning of this new era, right? Where, you know, you mentioned 9/11. You know, Napster was about to just turn everything upside down in this world. But these people, which I think is great, is that they knew how to play live, and so the Napster thing didn't bother them. They already shared their music, right? You know, they were playing Radio City Music Hall in 6 years after, you know, playing, you know, a Bowery size place. You know, like they were growing, and people were paying attention.
right, that's the flip side of it, which is what I think what he's just saying is basically like as the record sales or CD sales and income from that plummeted, for the bands who made their living playing live anyhow, place because,
They were
like the rest of
phenomenal.
America,
Yeah.
there's no middle class, right? So it's like a handful of huge superstars having hits, and then bands scuffling along.
So, it's about jam bands, right? So there's a certain quality of that music that we think of as being kind of more free, right, than your standard band that plays the same songs every night in the same way, right? And so bands that were doing that prior to this, Allman Brothers, Grateful Dead, some other bands that no one's ever heard of, it was always my impression, so I came up in the 70s and 80s, right, and before all this stuff. And then when these bands started popping, I was living in the city, Wetlands, went there, saw these bands. And there was this sort of melding of the Deadhead scene to this jam band scene. But they're not really playing like the Dead, really. And so can you explain how that sort of the Dead scene jam band, the idea of like more of like that free jam kind of thing, turned into this is a jam band as opposed to what those guys were doing? Like the quality, the different, how did it become jam band? As in that sense. So I'm not asking the question exactly the way I want to, but hopefully you understand kind of where I'm going now. So like,
This question is like a jam band song.
It is. That's how my brain works. That's how my brain works.
Improvisation.
But-
It's just they all had an audience that loved that spontaneity and loved that they didn't do the same thing twice. And at the end of the day, all of these bands don't really sound like each other, but they had that ethos in their vibe, and so people would want to keep coming back.
But why did it emerge at that moment in time as opposed to 10 years before?
That's when the people that want to sing with that.
That I don't necessarily know in terms of like early 80s. The people in this book are 18 years old in 1985. So what was happening around their birth was the 60s and 70s, and so they're just now wanting to make their own thing and melding probably new sounds that they are interested in, and but taking a page from that from that era of like not doing the same thing twice. And you'll get people to come back because they want to know, like, oh, you did something on Friday night, why would I come back Saturday? Aren't you? No, we're not doing the same thing at all.
So a lot of the guys in here, like all the Fish and Bluestrap, like all those Princeton guys, are all talking about in various ways how they were into the Dead, and that was how they found each other. Like or who was it that like all met at Columbia because they like had put favorite band, the Grateful Dead, and they all found 30 of them found each other. But it was pre-era. Like there wasn't really tribute bands per se then, and so I think these guys. This is just my kind of theory that they were into this music, and then when they got together, they just played their own thing, but they all had that same inspiration. And if those same guys met up now, they might just form a Dead tribute band. Hopefully
but
they
also
don't.
like club owners did not want tribute bands.
Right,
They wanted you to write original music. So if you couldn't say we have original music, then like they wouldn't have that conversation. Because tribute acts were for cruises. They were looked down on.
Yeah,
And they're not these days.
I remember,
which is,
I don't know which was it. Kenny's Castaways. One of the clubs on Bleecker Street sort of was the first place in New York that started having tribute bands all the time, and it really was kind of like exotic, And I talked to the guy there, and he was like, "Well, we had to quit booking the Guns N' Roses tribute band because the Axl guy just like took it so seriously. He was showing up 2 hours late. We had to explain like you can't do that in like a little forum." But yeah, that it was like in the mid-90s, it was like kind of a wild thing. Like, ooh, it's become very commonplace. I think they were wrapping us
Well,
up.
we can get to our last question? Sure.
I could close it with just commenting on my daughter's theme that she identified. I was thinking about it. So, and something that somebody else said about accessibility, like clubs are closing, right? It's a fortune to see a show. Like she can't afford to go to a show. She's 20. So like, I'm wondering if accessibility has something to do with her comment about bands. And then the other thing is Disney and American Idol. I feel like they're all producing like these single, ideal like, single performers. So maybe that's why also like the rise of the band may not be what is in demand because everybody's really looking for that next person on one of those types of shows. The next Taylor Swift, the next Olivia Rodrigo, or Harry Styles. I mean, they're all solo.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is maybe, a part of it. I think the TV shows probably had power in the 2000s, and they don't necessarily have that power anymore. They still do them, but they don't have as much power anymore. A friend of mine is a manager for pop artists, and he told me how one of his artists will just take beats that they construct and just constantly upload them to TikTok to see what the algorithm responds to in their 10 seconds. They're not fully formed. And if the algorithm is picking up on it and people are reacting to this 10-second snippet, then they will extract it and make a fully formed song on it. So like, I wouldn't say that, so to me, that's probably what is actually happening, and they have an amazing market research tool at their disposal, and so, they'll have 400 or 500 song snippets that they created in a month, and if it's constant uploading to see what is connecting. So that, that's a very different world than what we're talking about in terms of like bands and making like bands creating music. But there are a lot of labels from that era that are still putting out really good bands. Sub Pop, Matador. A lot of them are self-releasing it too. That's cool. But yeah, no, I hear you. It's super expensive, like $500.
Find
for
one
ticket.
good band you really like and just become good friends with them, but don't date any of them. Don't do that, but become good friends and just go to their shows and ride it up with one group of musicians that you really like and see what happens.
Yeah, and just a lot of things don't sell out these days. Like I saw the singer for Portishead, Beth Gibbons, at the Beacon, and her tickets were like $100, and I got on StubHub for $19 that day. So that was like a great deal. I'm very proud of this.
That's awesome. So hi, I'm Jonas Emily. I'm the Words Bookstore owner, but I'd like us all to give a big thank you and a round of applause.